Welcome to the Bush Air Podcast, episode number 2. I'm CC Pocock. Today I am going to explain how to explore the envelope of your airplane so that you can truly become familiar with it. If you want to become as safe as you can be and obtain the very best performance with any airplane that you fly, and especially before you attempt to do any flying that involves any low and slow maneuvering, challenging conditions in the mountains, backcountry, off-airport, short field, one way in, one way out, or STOL competitions, and if you don't want to have an accident, you must first get to know your aircraft exceptionally well by conducting a proper familiarization and test flight. You also have to record all the indicated airspeeds and how the aircraft responds and reacts during slow flight and when approaching and during various STOL configurations, and practice how to properly recover from unusual situations. Your aircraft should be an extension of you, not you an extension of your aircraft. You should never allow the aircraft to get ahead of you. Always be ahead of the aircraft and the situation. I've flown with hundreds of pilots, and it's amazing how many are frequently behind their airplanes, especially the high-performance ones. You need to learn and acquire the ability to feel what the airplane is doing or about to do. Learn to fly by feel. It's what we call seat-of-the-pants flying. Flying without relying on certain instruments, especially angle of attack indicators, and I'll rant about that later. You need to fully explore the lower end of the performance envelope of the aircraft. And in addition, you also need to build muscle memory through frequent practice to correctly react to sudden and unusual situations that may occur. The basic objectives of all the training that I give is to make pilots safer, more proficient, and skilled so as to lower the risk of an accident, and this is the very first and most important exercise that we do before continuing with any of my advanced flying courses. We've all heard and used the phrase pushing the envelope. This is commonly used in aviation, but I want to make this very clear. We never push the envelope during any of my courses. And you should never push the envelope at any time trying to learn your airplane or fly your airplane at any time. There's a huge difference between pushing the envelope and exploring the envelope. The correct term to be using when learning your aircraft and new skills is exploring the envelope. Pushing the envelope is a direct result of not having safely explored the envelope. Many pilots have attempted to do short field or off-airport landings somewhere out in the backcountry on the top of a mountain, or even during a STOL competition, without ever properly exploring the envelope of their airplane at a safe altitude, and end up in a STOL and crash. Or they come in too fast because they're afraid of getting too slow in case they do stall, and then end up crashing off the end of the strip or during a go-around procedure. This is when you end up pushing the envelope. This is when not truly knowing your aircraft by seat-of-the-pants flying and not being proficient in handling and responding correctly through muscle memory to sudden and unusual and demanding circumstances is going to end in catastrophe and sometimes death. We've seen this sort of thing many, many times. There are many YouTube videos and photographs on social media about these accidents, and some of them are fatal. I remember one day I was at a STOL competition that I was participating in many years ago. And I had just arrived the day before and was busy setting up my campsite when a pilot arrived in a nice brand new home-built airplane and parked next to me. We got chatty and he indicated that he had recently just finished building the airplane after a couple of years. And he said this was his first STOL competition in this airplane. I asked him if he had properly test flown and explored the envelope of his new airplane, in which his answer was a bit vague, what I recall. And so I immediately thought to myself that he should not be flying in the STOL competition with his newly built airplane, that he was, to me anyway, clearly not very familiar enough with or skilled enough to be safely flying at just above STOL speeds, low to the ground, in a STOL competition, with the pressure of all the spectators on top of it all. The next day, during the competition, he stalled about 20 feet above the runway and entered into a spin and crashed. Fortunately, he survived. I even have a photo that I took of it. And we'll be discussing these kinds of accidents in another episode at a later time. There have been too many other similar incidents and accidents, and they continue to happen to this day. To this day, they continue to happen. Unnecessary accidents and a lot of STOL spins. Any pilot who intends to perform any short field operations needs to possess the advanced skills required to be able to fly and control the aircraft safely at very slow airspeeds, very low to the ground, and should be able to do so without reference to any instruments, especially angle of attack indicators. Again, such a pilot should be able to instantly, without thinking about it, be able to immediately and correctly recover from a stall, or even worse, a wing drop, through muscle memory, which is only possible through frequent practice. I'm going to run through a typical familiarization flight that I teach all my students and what we need to do to start becoming safe and proficient with the airplane. First and foremost, we need to determine and configure the airplane's optimum center of gravity. And very few pilots and even instructors fully understand or even remotely understand the importance of optimum center of gravity and the effect it has on an aircraft and the advantages it has to the performance and to the safety of that aircraft. Never fly a nose-heavy airplane. A nose-heavy airplane does not fly well. If you don't have sufficient weight in the rear to create optimum center of gravity, then you need to add ballast in the form of water or other useful items such as tools and survival equipment or whatever you have. And it's going to be quite a lot of weight if you're only putting the weight in the baggage compartment, for instance. And you normally, in the backcountry, would always fly around with equipment in the aircraft anyway, so put it right to the back there, except for some of the most essential survival equipment that you would have to have with you at any time. But optimum center of gravity is far better and far safer than a forward center of gravity, as it leads to lower stall speeds to start with. Better and lighter elevator control, less drag, better lift generated by the wings, easier to set up on a stabilized approach, and smoother, more precise and safer landings. Landings are much better with optimum center of gravity. And even better fuel consumption and better cruise speed, and there's all kinds of advantages to having your aircraft configured continuously at optimum center of gravity. So overall, the aircraft performs way better, becomes safer than an aircraft with no weight in the back. For example, if you want to win a STOL contest, you need to have ballast in the rear as far back as possible, because no ballast in a STOL contest, no win. Next time you're at a STOL competition, take a close look at some of the pros airplanes, especially the tail draggers. You may notice that most of them will have lead weight attached to their tail wheel springs. Why? Because they understand the advantages of optimum center of gravity to winning the competition. Determining the optimum CG is achieved through a proper test flight. First, we start with an empty airplane with only one or two persons up front and no weight in the rear. Apply full flap, cut the power, trim the elevator back to try and get the airplane to glide hands off without the nose wanting to drop. and, of course, causing an increase in airspeed and so forth. You will notice that this is virtually impossible to achieve. With no ballast in the rear of the aircraft, you will run out of trim, and you will have to pull back on the stick. You'll have to apply back pressure to prevent the nose from dropping, and you're going to feel that the nose is heavy, pulling back on the stick the whole time to keep the thing flying. That's an indication that your nose heavy. It's like a seesaw. Like I always explain to my students, seesaw, two kids on a seesaw. You can go up and down all day long, and it's fairly easy to lift it up and to come back down again. One kid gets off. The one kid gets off the seesaw. It's not so much fun anymore, is it? And that's what a nose-heavy airplane is like. No weight in the back, only up front. You've got that same effect. Okay, so the nose drops now. Obviously, that's a sign that we definitely need weight in the back of the aircraft. So load some weight in the most rear section or in the baggage compartment and do the same exercise again. Continue increasing the weight of the ballast until the aircraft can maintain a hands-off glide without the nose pitching down and preferably without reaching max aft trim. Now, you have determined the optimum ballast to use in your aircraft as a specific station when flying empty, and also the optimum center of gravity for your aircraft. I like that word, optimum. Using the CG chart in your aircraft's pilot's operating handbook, calculate the weight and balance and ensure that the CG is within the safe limits. It should be somewhere in the middle of the graph, maybe slightly after the center. For future reference, no matter how much weight you have in the aircraft, you should always attempt to maintain this optimum center of gravity number for better handling, performance, and, of course, safer operations. Now that we have established the optimum center of gravity, we can go do the familiarization and test flight. Can't do that. We don't do anything until we have established optimum center of gravity. So because we have to take off anyway to climb to altitude to do this, we might as well use the takeoff to conduct our first test. And that is, we're going to determine the optimum takeoff speed for the aircraft by performing an optimum performance takeoff. An optimum performance takeoff is when the airplane will take off by itself if correctly configured, such as optimum center of gravity and optimum takeoff flap setting. We will discuss both nose wheel and tail wheel techniques. First, the nose wheel. Apply first notch of flap, always first notch of flap. This is called the optimum lift flap setting. I don't understand why some pilots take off without flaps, and even instructors teach their absolute BS to their students. I mean, no one's ever been able to give me a logical reason why you should ever take off, especially in an aircraft like a Cessna that's equipped with a good Fowler flap. Many other aircraft with good Fowler flaps. Why would you ever want to take off with no flap? It makes no sense. Some people give me an excuse well, we've got a 7,000-foot runway, we don't need flaps. Why would you want to keep the aircraft on the runway longer than necessary? But anyway, we're not going to get into the use of flaps right now because I can rant all day about things like this. We'll leave this for a later episode. All right, moving along. Apply a little positive back pressure on the elevator. About half deflection is always good. Apply full power and start the takeoff roll. The nose will rise and the airplane will lift off when it is ready to fly. At this very moment, record the indicated airspeed. You must be looking at the airspeed at the time that the aircraft takes off, otherwise you're going to miss the optimum takeoff speed. Because once the wheels leave the surface, it accelerates pretty quickly. Now, after you've recorded this airspeed, this becomes your optimum takeoff speed for your aircraft. But again, very importantly, this is based on optimum lift flap setting and optimum center of gravity. The tail wheel technique is similar to the nose wheel, except we basically just keep the stick neutral and allow the airplane to lift off in a tail low position. As we accelerate, the tail will rise by itself and the aircraft lifts off. You can, at this time, help it a little bit of back pressure on the stick, but be very careful not to ride the tail wheel on the ground, because that will increase the takeoff distance as well as the indicated airspeed. After the takeoff, climb to a safe altitude, a few thousand feet, so we can practice STOLs. The big one, something that most pilots are afraid of doing most of the time. You need to perform STOLs in various configurations, such as different flap settings, power settings, and record all the indicated airspeeds, including the STOL warning speeds, if you have a STOL warning. Most pilots are afraid of practicing STOLs on their own, and therefore they're afraid of STOLs, so they end up always flying a little bit too fast, especially on approaches on takeoff, thinking that by adding a little bit of speed is safer and keep them away from the stall, when in fact it is not. It just messes up your approach and it messes up your landings. You end up floating halfway down the runway. Having a fear of a stall, that fear of stalling an aircraft can kill you. Because if you stall, you may not be able to recover, especially when low to the ground. You're an accident waiting to happen one way or another. If it's not a high-speed accelerated stall, it may be a landing accident because of an excessive approach and landing speed. You may need to overcome your fear through practice. In fact, it's the only way to overcome your fear, is through practice. Practicing stalls over and over and over again. Getting comfortable with practicing stalls and stall recovery. It will make you a far safer pilot. How can you have a pilot's license and never practice slow flight and stall recovery? Because you're too afraid to do it by yourself unless you have an instructor holding your hand. If you ever have an unintentional stall occur in a real-world scenario, which is going to be low to the ground, on final approach, for instance, that you may not be able to recover. You shouldn't have a valid license and should never carry any passengers because you are putting their lives at risk. Instead of the $100 breakfast run to meet up with your buddies on a Sunday morning and sit around and talk about stalls and so forth, talking about it will not make you more proficient or safer, so rather go and practice it and build proficiency and become safer and build confidence. And you will feel better about yourself and even feel positively much safer. The most critical indicated stall speed for your aircraft is the power off full flap stall speed. Why? You must always be aware of the speed, especially during short field approaches, because often during a short field landing, we're flying below that speed because we have power on. And if at any time you reduce the power, you can have an instant stall. Record the indicated airspeeds during the approach to stall, the stall warning, and when the aircraft actually stalls. Now, just a quick note about stall warning speeds, or indicated stall warning speeds. Make sure that your stall warning indicator is calibrated correctly. I frequently come across this problem, especially when pilots come to me for training and they bring a Cessna equipped with a Sportsman leading edge stall kit. A common problem is, after the installation of these kits, is that the stall warnings go out of alignment or they just don't work properly. The most common problem is that they activate too early, way too early, at a very high indicated airspeed. Don't get me wrong, the Sportsman leading edge stall kit is one of the very best things you can ever attach to a Cessna. I have it on all of mine. So all of you that are really serious about backcountry flying, consider the Sportsman stall kit. It is far better than only VGs. Far better. But there's only one thing better than that. And that's a Sportsman leading edge with VGs on top of it. We'll be discussing more about, stall mods in upcoming episodes. Okay, back to the test flight. You may be amazed at the indicated speeds that the aircraft stalls at. Depending on the airplane, sometimes the airspeed indicator can indicate 0, especially when flying with full flaps and full power, like hanging on the prop. This is caused by what is known as a pitot tube position error or installation error. This false low indication occurs when the wing is at a high angle of attack during slow flight, and the air impacting the pitot tube results in only a portion of the air entering the tube due to the angle of the tube to the oncoming air, causing the airspeed indicator to read low, and sometimes a slight vacuum or negative pressure in the pitot-static system causing the reading to be -0. This is common in some Cessna 170s and early model 172s. I know this is the case in both my 170s and the 172, because the pitot tube sticks out ahead of the leading edge, and nowadays newer aircraft, the pitot tubes are under the wing, so are less prone to that error. Although the indicated airspeed may be a lot lower than the true airspeed or ground speed, the true stall speed will still be less with power on. There is a remarkable difference in the power on and power off stall speeds in a propeller-driven aircraft with engines up front or on the wings. Power reduces the stall speed because the propeller slipstream speeds up the air flowing over the wings, which delay the stall. So next, let's talk about practicing maintaining controlled flight in the stall. Now that we have recorded all the indicated stall speeds, the next thing to do is to practice maintaining controlled flight in a full stall, again with various flap and power settings. The reason you need to do this is so that you can learn how to maintain control after a stall occurs and during the recovery. Obviously, if you lose control, for example, if you're uncoordinated and drop a wing, it may not be possible to recover in time, especially if you're at a low altitude. The way we do this is simply pulling the stick all the way back to the stop and holding it there, and then continue to fly the airplane, mainly with rudders only. The next exercise after that is to practice and build muscle memory in recovering from the stall as quickly as possible and with minimal loss of altitude. The way most flight instructors teach stall recovery and the way most pilots demonstrate it is, to me, flat out wrong and unrealistic in the real world. For example, when I ask a pilot to demonstrate a stall recovery, the first thing they do is push the stick forward and add power and start pulling back to climb back up to altitude. This is the worst thing you can do. When practicing stalls in the flight school environment, it's always done at a few thousand feet altitude. And during the exercise, if you ever pay attention to the altimeter, you'll notice a couple of hundred or more feet of altitude loss. Because when you put the nose down and add power, you're increasing the vertical rate of descent and accelerating the aircraft down towards the ground. So why would you want to do that when you're only a few hundred feet above the ground, say on final approach? Doesn't make any sense. So that's not a real... In a real life scenario, if your airplane had to unexpectedly stall on you, it's not going to happen at 2,000-3,000 feet where you practice stalls. It would more likely be 200-300 feet on final approach. Or, turning from base to final, or the crosswind turn, or during low altitude operations of some sort, taking photographs and stuff. So using the typical flight school method that you were taught, you would fly the airplane into the ground trying to recover and very possibly enter a secondary stall at the same time. And so a far better and safer method, the method I teach, or my students, is to first apply power, the moment you stall, first apply full power, and then lower the angle of attack enough just to break the stall. Don't put the nose down towards the ground. It's not necessary. You've broken the stall. You don't have to lower the nose that much. Power first, lower the nose just sufficiently to break the stall, basically to the horizon or slightly below the horizon, and then retract flaps as your airspeed increases. And by using this method, we are able to recover every time, in most airplanes, in only 50 feet of altitude loss. So you can decide which one's better, 50 feet or a few hundred feet on short final, or a few hundred feet, even below 1,000 feet, around about 1,000 feet above the ground. You don't want to lose a few hundred feet during the stall recovery. You'll see the ground rush and start pulling back, secondary stall, and now you're going to just keep on going down. And if you're uncoordinated, of course, you're going to have a stall spin. So as opposed to to the flight school method, by using this method, you may find that you may be able to unstall the airplane before you even lower the angle of attack, before you even lower the nose, just by adding power. Why? Because of the propeller slipstream over the wings. And the next exercise after that, and remember, this sort of, you don't just do this once and now you've got it. This is something you have to practice over and over again as often as you possibly can and do it exactly correctly the same time, every time, to build muscle memory so that if this ever happens to you, you haven't got time to think. You haven't got time to think. It should just be like that. Okay, so practice. You must also practice recovering from uncoordinated stalls. This is something a lot of pilots don't want to do. When they're practicing coordinated stalls, it's bad enough that they drop a wing. So you should practice uncoordinated stalls and allow the wing to drop, and even the start of incipient spins. This is a scenario that kills people. Don't fear the stall. Recovering from a coordinated stall is easy. Don't fear the stall. Stalls are not a big deal. Fear the wing drop. Because if the wing drops during a stall practice, when you're practicing stall recoveries, if you drop a wing, you're behind the airplane. There's no excuse. Don't let the wing drop. When you practice stalls, don't let the wing drop. Unless you purposefully want it to happen so you can practice uncoordinated stalls, which we're doing now. And the other thing is when it happens, frequently, I mean, just about every single time, during training, the pilot uses ailerons instead of the rudder. The first reaction is ailerons because the wing goes this way. You use a stick or the wheel to do and the ailerons, and it's not going to help. It's going to make it worse. So you have to practice using rudder first instead of ailerons, and you have to practice this until you have built up muscle memory so that if it happens low to the ground, the first thing is that foot hits that rudder pedal. Frequent practice. Be sure that the ball is centered prior to a stall. Afterwards is too late. Let's talk about stalling in a steep turn and bust the myth that people believe that the wing will drop. If you're in a steep turn and you stall, wing should not drop. Doesn't matter if the wings are level or you're in a 60-degree bank turn. If you stall the airplane, the wing should not drop. You may lose some altitude, but it should not drop. If it drops, it means you're uncoordinated. The ball is not in the center. In most cases, however, it's not possible to ensure that the ball is centered 100% at all times, especially during, when you're in the traffic pattern, you're turning, you're maneuvering the aircraft, you've got the radio, you've got looking out the window for traffic, you've got tons of distractions. You can't fixate on the inclinometer the whole time. So at the time when the aircraft inadvertently stalls, there's a good chance that the ball could be just out enough in the wrong direction, and then you will have a sudden wing drop during the stall, which may be impossible to recover from due to your altitude. Now, you've adapted to 500 feet. Man, as soon as that nose drops, you're going down, and it's going to take a few hundred feet to pick it up. And if you're good enough, if you're quick enough, and you practiced enough, you could do it. So a simple trick I teach is whenever you're entering a turn, just don't use the rudders. Instructors focus a lot on that. They, teach your students, you always use the rudders in the turn. You've got to use rudders, keep the ball centered. Well, it's safer not to use the rudders. How about that? It's safer when you're low to the ground maneuvering the aircraft. It's safer, just don't use the rudders. Then you're almost guaranteed that if you did stall, you would not have a wing drop. Why? Because now you're slipping. If you don't use the rudders, you'll probably go into a slip instead of a skid. Go test it out. Next time you go fly, do a few turns and don't use the rudders, you'll see. The airplane will go into a slip. Automatically, the ball goes in the direction of the turn. A slipping turn is much safer than a skidding turn during a stall. In a slip, the aircraft, if you stall an aircraft and you're in a slip, you're not going to drop a wing. The aircraft will tend to roll the other way. It rolls away from the stall. And I call that auto recovery. Auto recovery. Go check it out. If you're playing with the rudders in a turn and you put too much rudder in, you're going to force that ball to the top of the turn and it can be just slightly out of that cage. And if you stall, that wing's going to drop on you. If you don't practice this frequently, this sort of stuff, you are at extremely high risk of not being able to recover if you encounter a stall spin. You simply have to develop the correct muscle memory reaction, as you may not have any time to think if it unexpectedly happens. If it happens to you at a low altitude, you'll get a fright. There's going to be delay in thinking. Most pilots, the majority of them, are going to make a mistake. If you haven't practiced the correct action and built up the muscle memory, you're going to do the wrong thing. For instance, if the wing drops, you're going to use the ailerons. You're going to forget about the rotors, and you can continue to go down in the stall spin. We've seen this happen. There's videos of it. The first action must be the correct action. The first thought that enters the brain must result in the correct action. If you stall and the wing drops, your reactions need to be lightning fast. Cut power, full opposite rudder to the wing drop. Immediately push a stick or yoke slightly forward, just enough to lower the angle of attack. Unstall the wings. Don't push a stick too far forward, otherwise you may go into a vertical dive or even invert it. It's happened to us a few times. And then normalize the rudders, and when rotation stops, slowly pull out into the climb, add power, climb away. Well, I couldn't say that fast enough because that's pretty much as quickly as it happens, and if you don't practice this, you're not going to remember all the stuff. So muscle memory, very important. Practice over and over and over again to try and recover with minimal loss of altitude. But more importantly, practice not having any wing drop at all at any time during a stall, and practice not ever getting into a stall. You know, all those pilots that are dead right now because of a stall spin could have been alive today if they had proper training or had practiced this on a regular basis. But most pilots think, well, either they're afraid of it or it's not going to happen to them because they're always coming in a little bit faster than, add a bit of speed and we'll be okay. That's a myth. We'll talk more about this stuff in the future. Stalls and stall spin, one of my favorite subjects to talk about, as well as CFIT. And we're going to be talking about this over and over again in many times in upcoming episodes, especially when I have guests on the show. Now let's talk about how to determine the proper stabilized approach speeds for your airplane. Now that we've done all the stalls, got that out the way, we can relax a little bit. We need to determine the optimum stabilized approach speed for the airplane and the minimum safe approach speed for the aircraft. These speeds are not in the Pilot's Operating Handbook. Okay. Optimum stabilized approach speeds are not published in the Pilot's Operating Handbook, and few pilots and few flight instructors actually know what an optimum stabilized approach speed is. In fact, most of them don't even know what a proper stabilized approach is, or how to even set up a proper stabilized approach, or even teach a proper stabilized approach. A stabilized approach is an approach that will result in a safe and precise landing with minimal input of control. That's a stabilized approach. But we'll get more into that later. The optimum stabilized approach speed is the speed that we use on all our normal approaches. Every time we're coming into land, this is the speed we should be using. And the minimum safe stabilized approach speed is typically the speed that we use during a short field approach, or at any time on an approach where we need to slow down, maybe for separation or whatever the case is. The way I teach this is different to the way I explain it in the Bush and Mountain Flying Handbook, which, by the way, if those of you who don't have it, is available. You can order it from the Bush Air website as well as from Amazon. I'm going to share the way that I actually teach it in my courses. Determining optimum stabilized approach speed can be done at the same time, like it's a 2-for-1, that you determine the optimum center of gravity. So the optimum CG must first be established. Trying to do a stabilized approach in a nose-heavy airplane simply does not work. Yet, look at all the flight school airplanes. And most pilots, they fly around in nose-heavy airplanes. They don't think of putting weight in the back, how it's going to help the safety and the performance of the aircraft and so forth. And so it's difficult to set up a stabilized approach without ballast in the back of the aircraft, or at least without optimum center of gravity. It doesn't work. So let's carry on. Apply full flap. If you want to do, we're busy determining now what the optimum center of we're trying to establish an optimum center of gravity for the aircraft by placing weight in the rear, and we call this ballast. So apply full flap, cut the power, trim the elevator aft to have the airplane glide hands off without the nose pitching down, without the nose wanting to drop. Once you've achieved this, observe the indicated airspeed on the ASI, on the airspeed indicator, and record it. This number is basically your approximate optimum stabilized approach speed for your airplane, based on, of course, optimum center of gravity. That's an approximate number. It could be out a few miles an hour either way, but it's a good guide. We can fine-tune it a bit by playing with the pitch, with the trim settings. You can trim the nose down a little bit. The speed will increase, but it mustn't run away. So, you play with the pitch down, pitch up, with the trim, and so forth, and that will give you a high and low. It'll give you a range of maybe 5, 6, 7 miles an hour. Sometimes it could be even 10 miles an hour. And as long as you stay within that range, when your aircraft is configured at optimum center of gravity, that will be your optimum stabilized approach speed for that aircraft. The other one is obviously the minimum stabilized approach speed, minimum safe stabilized approach speed, which is the slowest speed we should do an approach, or can do an approach, without getting too close to the power off stall. Remember, I said that's a critical number. You must always remember what that is. And remaining ahead of the power curve. Don't ever get beyond the power curve, especially a low approach. That's one thing I hate, is when I see people dragging an airplane in to come do a landing, especially a short field landing. They think they won't be able to do a short field landing without dragging it over the trees. Very dangerous, very hazardous. Don't do that. Keep a nice, steep, stabilized approach every time. It'll keep you, give you altitude for safety, and also you'll need less power to maintain the approach, or the stabilized approach. So as a rough guide, it's basically when the stall warning indicator starts coming on, if you have a stall warning, and if it's calibrated correctly, in order to achieve this speed, you may need to add a little bit of power to help raise the nose above the horizon, get the wings flat in the horizon. If you're looking out the window, the wings are flat, slightly positive. Now we have concluded the familiarization flight. Okay, we've got all our speeds, takeoff speeds, we've got our approach speeds, we've done all our stalls, got hand in glove with the aircraft, practiced some better techniques and procedures for stall recovery and so forth. And you need to do this as frequently as you can. Every now and again, take your airplane up and go practice. It will make you safer. I recommend that you go up and do this flight multiple times until you become comfortable and relaxed with your airplane. The more you practice this stuff, the happier you are going to, and safer you're going to feel. Remember, the more you practice, the more proficient, skilled, and confident and safer you will become. During my courses, after we have completed this first exercise, the familiarization and test flight, all my students are so happy and feel much more tuned in and comfortable with the airplane, and we achieve this in only 1 hour. So next time, the next episode, we will be discussing how to properly set up a stabilized approach and consistently perform a precision landing on the spot that you aim for every single time. I hope you have found this episode helpful. We will continue to discuss many of these things and many other things in future episodes over and over again. So finally, if anybody's interested and would like more information on the training that I give, or to order the Bush Mountain Flying Handbook, please go to the Bush Air website. The URL is down there in the corner of the screen, bush-air.com. So until next time, fly safe.